Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our legislative session wrap-up webinar. Today, we'll be highlighting key actions taken during the 2025 legislative session and go over things that might impact your district. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature. If you'd like to chat with other attendees, you can use the chat feature, but if you have a question, use Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers today, Hasina Wittenberg and Mark Landauer from our Government Affairs team, and Spencer Rockwell, our Assistant General Counsel.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for SDAO's 2025 legislative session wrap-up. It's great to have so much interest in our legislative program and what happened during the last legislative session. As most of you know, in odd-numbered years, the legislative session lasts no more than 160 days. So next year in 2026, it will only last a maximum of 35 days. So we have lots of things to review with you today, including all of the ongoings of many pieces of legislation that affect special districts. This session was probably one of the most politically complex and high-volume sessions we've seen in decades. We've seen walkouts before, we've seen all kinds of drama, but this time we just saw a tremendous number of pieces of legislation introduced and attempted to be advanced. So I'm going to give an overview of the political and fiscal landscape, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mark Landauer, who many of you know, who's going to take us through some specific legislation that directly affects special districts, and then he's going to turn it back over to me for a wrap-up. So to talk a little bit about the 2025 legislative session, it was the 83rd time the Legislative Assembly convened, and the session began with Democratic supermajorities in both chambers, which is very notable. In the House, Speaker Julie Fahey from Eugene led her first full long session along Majority Leader Ben Bowman from Tigard, and the Democrats held a 36-24 edge over Republicans, who were led by Christine Drazan, who that name might be familiar to you. Drazan ran for governor against Governor Kotek last election and lost by 3.5 points, and is running again against Governor Kotek for the 2026 election. In the Senate, President Rob Wagner, former lobbyist for AFT, American Federation of Teachers, and Lake Oswego Senator, served his second term with a new Democratic Majority Leader named Casey Jama, a Somali immigrant, and they maintained an 18-12 majority over Senate Republicans and were led by Daniel Bonham from the Dalles, who has left. You're going to hear a lot of that from us, people leaving, a lot of changes, a lot of turnover, and it's very difficult for us to navigate, but it is what it is. So Daniel Bonham has actually resigned his seat and left to be the U.S. Deputy Labor Secretary under Lori Chavez-DeRemer, which is a big job. So it's pretty cool to see somebody from Oregon getting a big job in any administration, federal administration, whether it be Republican or Democrat. So with those numbers, the 36 and 18 supermajorities, Democrats had the votes to pass tax and revenue measures without any Republican support, and that dynamic really affected every major debate that was held during this legislative session. A little bit about our legislative assembly. It was one of the most diverse in Oregon's history. There were 19 new members, 50-50 gender split, record BIPOC representation at 25%, and the largest contingent of Vietnamese American legislators serving any legislative assembly out of any state in the country. So we started the session with the governor's budget and legislative priorities, and before the session began, Governor Tina Kotek released a $39.3 billion general fund and lottery budget for the 25-27 biennium, which is up from $33.5 billion 2 years prior to that. Her main focus was primarily on 5 topics: housing and homelessness, which you will often hear Governor Kotek talk about, mental health and addiction services, K-12 student outcomes, wildfires funding stability, which we will talk further about, and a comprehensive transportation package to stabilize ODOT's finances. So those 5 themes really did dominate most of the session, particularly when it came to wildfire and transportation. And then you'll hear from Mark about some other bills that were pretty dominant as well. So from day one, the legislature faced a tidal wave of legislation. More than 3,400 bills were introduced, the most in over 2 decades. And most of them were placeholder bills with a relating clause of like relating to property taxes, and who knows what was going to go into the bill. It's just a lot of pieces of legislation introduced in that manner. And then, of course, we had very short public testimony windows, which made people pretty anxious about bills that were being introduced and the lack of ability to actually engage and participate. But despite that chaos, this was the first long session since 2019 without a Republican walkout, and that is most likely strongly due to the ballot measure that was passed that bars individuals from running for re-election if they have walked out for more than 10 days. So this time around, lawmakers stayed put and they didn't walk out, and ultimately passed, out of that 3,400 bills introduced, 640 bills and a balanced $139 billion state budget, which is a 6% increase over the prior biennium. So the session addressed wildfire, labor policy, and under the labor policy, which Mark will talk about, most notably unemployment for striking workers, which our neighbor to the north, Washington State, has also passed, housing investments, a major fiscal rebalancing. But perhaps the most visible failure in this regular 2025 legislative session was the inability to actually pass a comprehensive transportation package. Despite many attempts, many versions, many conversations, many hearings, many committees, it just did not end up making it through the final session, and we ended up having a special session to address that situation, and I'll be talking more about that at the very end of the program. So with that, I will transition and hand it over to Mark, and he is going to walk through some of the major bills and policy themes that came out out of the legislative session and what they mean for our membership, so you can be further educated and comply with potential things that you need to comply with.
Thank you, Hasina. I hope that I'm coming through at this point. Well, it's always a pleasure to visit with our members, and I'm happy to be here today. The first thing I'm going to cover is recreational immunity. This was a huge issue for our members across the spectrum. This bill, Senate Bill 179, provides, as many of you know, recreational immunity provides immunity to landowners from claims of personal injury or property damage when the landowner has made the land available to the public for recreational purposes without a fee, and the claim arises from a person's use of the land for the principal purpose of recreation. Recreational immunity limits the liability from ordinary negligence claims arising from the use of trails or structures on public easements or unimproved rights of way by foot, horse, bicycle, or other non-motorized means for cities or counties who opt into the law. Immunity under this law is not conditioned upon the reason a person is using the trail or structure. In late 2023, some cities, counties, and other landowners, including special districts, closed their recreational trails and access trails after a decision on recreational immunity was issued in what is called the Fields versus Newport case, City of Newport. In that case, the court held that it was for the fact finder to determine whether the principal purpose of walking was recreational when the plaintiff walked on an improved trail providing access to a beach. It found that the recreational immunity does not apply to improved trails used to access other lands that the person intends to use for recreational purposes. In 2024, we were able to make some temporary changes to the recreational immunity law, but a sunset was included in that legislation. and that sunset was January 2nd, 2026. So it was imperative for us to address the sunset issue during the long session. Senate Bill 179 made those temporary changes permanent. So specifically, the bill allows local governments, including special districts, to opt into ORS 105668, limiting liability from ordinary negligence claims arising from the use of trails or structures on public easements or unimproved rights of way by foot, equine, bicycle, bicycle, or other non-motorized means. It also adds immunity to ORS 105688 for improved paths, trails, roads, and other rights of way that are used to access land for recreational purposes, and limits immunity for improvement, design, maintenance that was completed in a manner constituting gross negligence or recklessness, wanton or intentional misconduct, or for which the actor is strictly liable. The bill also adds running, walking, and bicycling to the non-exclusive list of outdoor activities in the definition of recreational purposes in ORS 105672. Folks, one of the things that you'll be hearing from SDO shortly is a new immunity statute that districts are now eligible to actively employ by passing a resolution or ordinance. We are working with outside legal counsel to provide information to all our members and a model ordinance or resolution that each of you will be able to present to your elected officials for consideration. At that time, we will provide a description of what this resolution is intended to provide, additional immunities that haven't been available to special districts. So I'll move on to our next bill, which was House Bill 2944. And it deals with penalties for under the Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act. As you know, public employees are eligible to organize and engage in collective bargaining, and establishes a uniform process for employees to join and be represented by labor organizations. Under PEBCA, labor organizations provide each public employer with a list of public employees who have been authorized or who have authorized a public employer to make deductions from the public employee's salary or wages to pay dues, fees, and any other assessments or authorized deductions to the labor organization. A public employer uses the list to make the authorized deductions and remit payments to the labor organization. If a labor organization provides a public employer with a list of employees and fails to make an authorized deduction or remit payment to the labor organization, the public employer is liable to the labor organization without recourse against the employee who authorized the deduction for the full amount of the employer for the full amount that the employer failed to deduct and remit to the organization. Specifically, House Bill 2944 does the following. It requires the Employment Relation Board to impose a civil penalty of not less than $1,000, nor more than $5,000, if the Employment Relation Board finds that the public employer named in an unfair labor practice complaint has violated, and the employer has previously violated the requirement that the employer provide the name and date of hire, contact information, employment information about employee in the appropriate bargaining within the designated timelines, or a right to receive a full amount of remittance for deductions authorized by the employees. For any subsequent violation, the Employment Relation Board is required to impose a civil penalty of not less than $5,000 nor more than $10,000. It does require the Employment Relations Board to consider extenuating circumstances that the employer has proven contributed to cause the violation when determining the amount of the civil penalty. States that the extenuating circumstances is not an affirmative defense to a violation for any repeat or subsequent violations. This is a bill that really requires employers to make the authorized deductions and remit payment to the labor organization within a time period that aligns with the payroll processing schedule established by the employer, not to exceed 30 calendar days following the date of the deduction. The next, and I should note that 2944 does not become effective until January 1 of 2026. The next bill, however, House Bill 3187, dealing with age discrimination, became effective September 26 of this year. In Oregon, well, I should say the Federal Age Discrimination in Employment Act provides individuals who are 40 years or older from age-based discrimination in workplaces with 20 or more employees. However, Oregon law prohibits age discrimination in employment under the Oregon Employment Discrimination Law. It protects individuals who are 18 years of age or older from age-based discrimination in workplaces with at least one employee. There are some exceptions to age discriminations, particularly for businesses that can demonstrate a valid reason for age-based decisions. For example, certain jobs may require age-based restrictions due to safety or other specific requirements. House Bill 3187 makes it an unlawful employment practice for an employer or prospective employer or an employment agency prior to completing the initial interview or making a conditional offer of employment to request or require disclosure of an applicant's age or date of birth, or when the applicant attended or graduated from any educational institution. The measure permits the information to be requested only if it's necessary to affirm the applicants meet bona fide occupational qualifications or to comply with any provision of federal, state, or local law, rule, or regulation. The next bill, Senate Bill 731, is a pretty brief bill, but it is important. This bill becomes effective on January 1, 2026. It requires that when an employer's employment policies provide a pay differential for a public employee's use of bilingual or multilingual skills in performing assigned duties, the policies must also provide a pay differential for an employee's use of American Sign Language in performing the assigned duties. In other words, if you're paying an employee additional wages due to the fact that they are either bilingual or multilingual, this requirement also applies to the use of American Sign Language. The next bill, Senate Bill 906, Pay Stub Information Disclosure. Again, this bill will become effective January 1, 2026. It requires an employer to provide all employees at the time of hire with a written explanation of earnings and deductions shown on a required itemized statement provided to employees on regular pay days, and at other times there are payments of wages, salaries, or commissions. The bill specifies what the written explanation must include and how an employer may provide this information to employees. It requires employers to review and update this information by January 1 of each year, and it directs the Bureau of Labor and Industries to develop and make available to employers a model written guidance document that employers may use and customize to satisfy the requirements of this measure. The BOLI commissioner is only allowed to assess a civil penalty not to exceed $500 against any person or employer that violates this written explanation requirement. And as Hasina mentioned previously, Senate Bill 916, unemployment for striking workers. As she mentioned, this was absolutely one of the most controversial bills during this session. It provides that an individual who is otherwise eligible for unemployment benefits from the Oregon Employment Department is not disqualified for unemployment insurance benefits or a waiting week credit for any week that an individual is unemployed because of a lockout. In other words, the 1 week waiting period is waived if an employer locks their employees out. It specifies that an individual is disqualified for unemployment insurance benefits for the first week that the Oregon Employment Department finds that an unemployment of an individual is due to a strike. The measure establishes a process to allow an otherwise eligible individual to not be disqualified for unemployment insurance benefits or the waiting week credit for any week following the first week that the Oregon Employment Department finds the individual is unemployed due to a strike. In other words, there is 1 week of a waiting period during a strike before a striking worker can receive unemployment benefits. The original bill would have provided up to 26 weeks of unemployment for striking workers. Under the bill that ultimately passed, a striking worker would be eligible for up to 10 weeks of unemployment insurance during a strike. Now I'm going to discuss a couple public contracting bills that are going to be impacting many of our members. House Bill 2680 is a bill dealing with fenestration products. And this was a new word to me and maybe to others as well. Fenestration is essentially the installation, repair, or remodel of windows and doors or systems of windows and doors. Specifically, House Bill 2680 requires that a public agency that provides public funds to install, repair, or remodel a fenestration product or system in a public building that a public agency constructs, remodels, repairs, and owns or leases on a public works project of $25 million or more for new construction and $5 million or more for remodel work, to require the following of the contractor. The contractor must have all licenses and insurance required in Oregon and have a national certification as a glazing contractor, and at least one of the workers or technicians must have a national certification as an architectural glass and metal technician. And this will become operative July 1, 2027. The measure also requires the contractor operative on July 1 of 2028 to demonstrate that 25% of the contractor's employees have a national certification as an architectural glass and metal technician. The measure finally defines what fenestration product or system, national certification, and public agency and public funds. So ultimately, if you are going to build a new public works project of $25 million or more, you will need to use a certified architectural glass and metal technician beginning in July of 2027. or if you are doing a remodel of $5 million or more. And then you will need to have 25% of that workforce working on glasswork and door work, 25% of the workforce working on that particular work by July of 2028. Interestingly, we only found 3 certified fenestration workers in all of Oregon at the time that this bill was being debated. And so I suspect that there are a number of people who are going through the certification process now. But again, despite the fact that this became operative September of 26, the actual requirements under this bill do not begin and become operative July 1st of 2027. Now, the next bill is one that was very controversial, and regrettably, it did pass. It is House Bill 2688, and I can tell you with great certainty that all the public associations heavily opposed this bill, and regrettably, it ultimately passed. House Bill 2688 requires the payment of prevailing wages for off-site work. I will now provide more detail here. Essentially, this bill applies the prevailing wage rate to what is called bespoke, which is bespoke means very tailor-made, if you will, for off-site fabrication, pre-construction, assembly, or construction work performed specifically for and in accordance with specifications of a public works project for the following systems: mechanical systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, refrigeration, other ducting, piping systems or components, plumbing systems or components, electrical systems or components of electrical systems that conform with the requirements under certain statutes and the rules of the Electrical and Elevator Board, boiler systems or components of boiler systems, ornamental and structural iron, masonry and plaster systems or components, roofing, flashing, and architectural panel systems or components, other than glazing systems and components, and mechanical work. House Bill 2688 removes the application to other work that involves fabricating or prefabricating modules, components, structures, supports, or fixtures, or parts of fixtures in accordance with specifications for particular public works. It requires the Bureau of Labor and Industries to adopt rules prior to the operative date of the Act that specify which manufacturing and which standard inventory items are excluded from the definition of public works and the requirements for reporting off-site work. The requirements under this bill will go into effect July of 2026. That seemed like an awful lot of information, and I recognize that, and it frankly is. BOLI is beginning the rulemaking process on this bill. That's why it became operative September 26th of this year. Again, it will not be implemented until July of 2026. So we will have about 1 year, but BOLI wants to complete this actually much more quickly. We are in the midst of working on some rules to clarify how this will impact all the public bodies that are required to follow this statute. So there will obviously be more information to come, but beginning in July of 2026, you will need to pay the prevailing wage for certain off-site work for bespoke work under, as I said, mechanical systems, heating, electrical, boiler systems, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we'll provide a great deal more information on this, but this was one of the biggest and most important public contracting bills that was enacted this last session. And with that, I believe that I can turn this back over to Hasina. Thank you very much.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Mark. A lot of public contracting, a lot of topics there. I'm just going to talk about 4 bills and then talk about the transportation package and the special session. And then we'd be happy to take any questions that you have on the bills that we've spoken about or anything else that's on your mind, provided it fits in the context of the 25 session wrap up. First bill I want to talk about is House Bill 2930, which will become effective January 1, 2026. For those of you who know, we have had, Oregon has a very, very strong interest in ethics legislation and ethics laws, and they date back to 1974. And really our legislature has been very focused on the fact that it's a citizen legislature, and conflicts of interest as they relate to declarations of conflict of interest in a citizen legislature can be very difficult to define. And so over time, the definitions of actual and potential conflicts of interest have evolved, but we've always had legislation that's been centered in statutory legislation that's been centered on financial benefit or detriment to a public official, their relatives, or businesses with which they're associated with. Those are the 3 triggers. Financial benefit or detriment to a public official. Does it help me or hurt me? They're all of my relatives or any businesses with which I'm associated with. So House Bill 2930 makes a small but a really meaningful change, and you're going to want to know about it because it's expanding the conflict of interest provisions that currently exist in statute to include, so that when you're declaring a conflict of interest, it's currently any relative. This bill expands it to any person residing with a public official or a candidate. So if you have a live-in girlfriend, or insert all kinds of potentials for people who are living in your household. They don't have to be related to you. They just have to be living in your household. That conflict of interest provision will now be expanded to include those individuals, and you'll need to declare a conflict of interest in that case. House Bill 2321. A lot of our districts are dependent on property taxes. For instance, like fire districts that don't run emergency medical services are 95% dependent on property taxes. Don't charge a lot of fees like some of our water and sewer districts. Many of us, we've heard a lot about property taxes and the struggles, not only just within special districts category, but cities, counties, and to some extent school districts, even though they have the school funding formula. Our property tax system was built on 2 key voter approved measures. For those of us who've been around for a while, Measure 5 in 1990 and then Measure 50 in 1997, which shifted our property tax system from a levy-based system to a rate-based system, and then capped property tax growth at 3% annually. Outside of GO bonds are outside of all of that. So there have been many, many proposals related to property tax reform, reset at sale, compression issues, all kinds of stuff, and none of them pass. And to be very honest with our membership, it is because voters don't approve. Even though people will say, I really wish my fire district had more money, and boy, I wish they weren't struggling. The people like, all of the polling shows that people like Measure 5 and 50 and want to keep it because it keeps property taxes low. So that's why we have not seen in the last 2 decades any real property tax reform. And we are unlikely to see anything in the next year or 2. But this bill, House Bill 2321, directs the Legislative Revenue Office to produce a comprehensive study of Oregon's property tax system and identify options to modernize it. And those options could include all kinds of things, like increasing the number of years a local option levy could be effective. you name it. There were no barriers put on what they could consider. So we will, Legislative Revenue Office will be convening a group of stakeholders, and special districts will be involved in this, along with our other coalition partners, League of Cities, even the unions will be participating in this. And a report's going to come out, and it's going to talk about the current system, the impacts of Measure 5 and 50, and what it looks like today, and have a whole list of stakeholder concerns and input from statewide associations representing local governments, including ours. And then it will also present some options for the legislature to consider to modernize the state property tax system. As part of that, there will be an analysis of advantages and drawbacks to each of those options. So it will be fairly nonpartisan because it should be nonpartisan because it's Legislative Revenue Office, but we will be participating in this. The final report is due on December 1st of 2026. So that will be leading into the long 160-day legislative session in 2027. But just letting you know that there is a discussion about property tax reform that is going to take place before the 27th legislative session. Then House Bill 3518, County Assessment and Taxation Funding. For those of you who have heard me before, I start out always by talking about county A&T funding as something that is extremely important to our association and our membership, because all 36 counties are responsible for processing the property tax roll, and we value that. And if they don't process the roll, they don't collect the funds, and they don't distribute them to us. And if the roll isn't healthy, then we don't get our revenue. So we really do value our county assessment and taxation programs, all 36 of them. That being said, it's not exciting. It's not like law enforcement or some other elections or some other things that other county commissioners might want to prioritize over the boring property tax roll and the function that is a county function that needs to take place. So some counties have been experiencing reductions in their county assessment and taxation roll processing, and have really been struggling to actually collect our property taxes, and reductions in revenue for the counties, and just for different priorities that counties are placing for spending those dollars. So we've seen over the last couple of years several proposals come forward. The most recent one, which did not pass, House Bill 3518, would have required and redirected 0.3% of all property taxes, including ours, every special district, city, every county, the county's already doing it, but city and school districts, to divert 0.3% of their property tax revenue to fund county assessment and taxation programs to collect our property taxes. So basically charging us somewhat of a fee, a percentage, to collect our revenue. And we oppose that because we believe that county assessment and taxation funding is a county function, and they should be collecting. That's what they're supposed to do as the county. But that being said, we've also been very supportive of pilot programs that could be implemented in areas like Curry County and other struggling counties where we can see, oh my goodness, they really are struggling down there. They're down to X number of employees in this department, and we need to make sure our revenues are collected. So we oppose a general outright 0.3% or whatever it is for every single county to just get these funds, and for our districts to have to forego those funds. But we sort of made it pretty clear last session. If you build it, we will show up. So if you can demonstrate to us that you are going to give us more revenue, or at least make us whole, we'll be happy to enter into a conversation about helping counties fund this function, because it's very important to our districts who are solely property tax revenue dependent. So there'll be more on that. We've had so many work groups on this. At some point there's going to be, and this next upcoming budget cycle is going to be tough. So just flagging that for you is something that did not happen, but more conversations to be had. And then Senate Bill 454, Rural Fire Protection District funding. This was effective July 1 of 2025. There are about 250 RFPDs that levied about $550 million in property taxes last fiscal year, which is about a 10% increase over the prior year. But about $2 million of that was lost to Measure 5 compression. Senate Bill 454 tells the Department of State Fire Marshal's Office to create an advisory committee to examine funding mechanisms and limitations for rural fire protection districts. And so they're sort of running their own revenue. I guess it's similar, but not the same, just for RFPDs. And they're going to develop funding recommendations and deliver them by December 31st of 2026. So those are the bills that I wanted to highlight for you. And then I want to end on transportation, which took up a lot of airtime during the session. Once that proposed comprehensive transportation funding plan failed to receive enough support during the legislative session to move forward, there was eventually a compromise achieved during a special session that saved ODOT from major layoffs. It was kind of shocking, really, to see all session long this whole transportation package be debated and then not move forward, even on the last day when the governor was, making phone calls and in the building and trying really hard to get the votes, even though the Democrats had a super majority. Governor Kotek ended up having to call a special session. So almost 2 months after session ended, she told legislators, you're going to show up in Salem on August 29th, and we're going to consider a scaled down version of a transportation package that focuses on stabilizing ODOT's budget and preserving just basic local road and transit funding. So this new package during the special session didn't have all the bells and whistles, and it was scaled back significantly to just basically preserve ODOT jobs and give cities and counties the same money that they had previously been given. And Republicans, in the same time, won some concessions that require accountability reporting on expenditures of transportation funds. There's been a lot of media coverage of, I guess one could call it wasted dollars in this area. So the measure ultimately passed with bipartisan support in the House, but zero Republican support in the Senate. And the package will raise almost $6 billion over 10 years. And it implements the following things: a 6-cent per gallon increase in the state gas tax starting on January 1, 2026. Increases title and registration fees for gas cars. Makes a bunch of changes to the weight mile tax system for trucks, which is very important to the trucking industry. Doubles the employee pay, so what you as an employee pay for transit. The current payroll tax is 0.1%. So you as an employee, all people who get anybody who gets a W-2 is paying a 0.1% payroll tax. This will increase to 0.2%, so doubling it. And it will sunset, which will go away, meaning on January 1, 2028, and go back to the 0.1%. So that's kind of a harbinger for, okay, well, there's going to be a big conversation about what to do after that, because everybody in the transit world is really counting on not having it revert back to the 0.1%. And then beginning in 2031, which is quite a ways out, EV owners will have to participate in either the road usage charge, which basically charges EV users by the mile, or pay a flat annual fee. I think it's $240 a year for EV owners, which is not until 2031. There was some drama on this whole thing because people did not want the Department of Administrative Services to be able to lower or raise fuel and weight mile tax rates. So amendments were adopted to take that away and make it clearer. And then an amendment to make sure that the 2028 payroll tax did actually revert back to 0.1% in 2028. That was like a concession that the Republicans received. So in the end, the bill achieved what the governor set out to achieve by preventing about 500 ODOT employees from being laid off, which is about 10% of its workforce. The bill will basically preserve the traditional 50-30-20 revenue split between the state, counties, and cities when it comes to transportation. But we're not done with this topic yet, because the governor had until November 12th, which is I think 2 days from now, to sign the measure. And she signed it without any fanfare finally on Friday. And people There was very little media coverage of that on Friday, but today there is some. And so Republicans have vowed to refer this new tax increase to the voters. So in order to do that, they will have until December 28th, which is like maybe 42 days, to collect about 78,000 signatures to refer this tax measure to the ballot. It's a hefty, that's a lot of signatures to collect. You can't just get 78,000 signatures. You have to collect over at least 25% more than that, because there's a lot of process when it comes to collecting signatures. So you have to have a cushion there. And the opposition campaign has released some polling that shows that 86% of likely voters would sign a petition to refer the measure to the ballot, and 67% of people would vote to repeal the measure. So that's pretty compelling polling. We'll see if people actually want to get off their butts really quickly, and how organized this campaign can be to refer this to the ballot, because it's a very short time frame and a very large number of signatures. But we'll see if people are motivated enough by the 6-cent gas tax and the payroll tax increase. So while we saw, finally got a transportation package, a very scaled back one, a very minimal one, it's possible that transportation package will be referred to the ballot and overturned or not. And so we'll probably still be talking about transportation in 2026 and also 2027. So that concludes my portion. And we really appreciate you being here today. And thank you for everything that you do for Oregon Special Districts. And we are here to answer any questions that you have.
All right. So can everybody hear? Can you hear me, Hasina?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For some reason, I can't show myself. Anyway, we do have a question. What was the Senate bill number where employers will be required to provide explanation of payroll items?
Oh,
That's Mark. Oh, you're frozen, Mark.
it's Senate Bill 906. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Senate Bill 906.
Great. And if we have any more questions, just go ahead and pop them in the chat or Q&A. We do have a thank you for the two of you. A huge thank you to you for all the hard work and dedication you put into the fight, and for keeping us informed throughout the session and beyond.
Thanks,
You're
Joe.
welcome.
Okay, so this might need more clarification. It just says taxes on land in fire district. I'm not sure what that's asking. Maybe Bradley, maybe you can rephrase that and resubmit. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, bilingual. Oh, can you see that, Mark?
Yeah. Is it a percentage or a dollar amount, or either, as long as it's the same pay differential offered to other? I would, Lisa, yes, same pay differential, whether it be, for Spanish or ASL. It should be consistent. Hope that helps.
Then there was, I think it's a comment, HB 3940, forest land classification. Oh, taxes on land in fire district likely pertains to HB 3940.
Hey, Mark, I think that's the wildfire bill.
I think it is too. That's the Lively, Levy, Broadman, Lieber bill. I can maybe pull it up in our final report. I think I have it. Sorry, folks, there were 3,400 bills, and just remembering the content of every single bill just by number, usually we can pull that off, but I'm sorry, not in this case. So I'm having to pull up that particular measure. Give me a moment here. 3940. There we go. Yeah, that's the wildfire funding bill. It raises and here, let me get that. That bill raises and allocates money to pay for wildfire costs, imposes a tax on the distribution of oral nicotine products, and directs the revenue to the purpose of related to wildfire. It also directs 20% of the interest attributed to the rainy day fund to the purposes related to wildfire as well. So yes, that was the quote unquote comprehensive wildfire funding package. I hope that that helps you, Chief Stewart. You know, Chief Stewart knows all about that bill.
We have a question. Any comments or guidance on SB 243 and it has concealed carry in parentheses?
243. Let me look at that one too.
Yeah, that's where you can regulate guns.
Yeah.
Local governments, we worked very hard to make sure we had parity.
Yeah, we did work very hard. Could you repeat that bill number? I'm sorry.
243.
Oh, yes, that, okay, I remember which one that is. So that particular bill was interesting because originally it would have only permitted cities and counties to regulate concealed permittees from entering their buildings where their public officials meet. So that's one of the key triggers on that particular bill, that public bodies can now regulate people from entering their buildings with a concealed weapon if they hold a concealed weapon permit, right? So originally that would have only applied to cities and counties. Both Hasina and I worked to get that to also apply to special districts. However, Hasina and I both recognize that probably a majority of our members won't enact an ordinance or a resolution to that effect, but we certainly wanted the ability of our members to make that choice for themselves. Originally, the bill would have not allowed special districts to have that option, and we made, I would say, some very compelling arguments that we should be allowed to. And of course, at the end of the day, we prevailed in our arguments on that. I see Michael Grimm put something here. Let's file soon today. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. I see that Chief Stewart is providing some additional information to folks if you want to talk about the wildfire funding package that was enacted in 3940. To feel free to reach out to him. He's provided his phone number there. And if you need to reach him by via email, feel free to reach out to me, Jennifer, or Hasina. We can get you that. And then Mike Grimm says, no tax opposition. Can begin collecting signatures on November 17. Their statewide goal is 100,000 by December 20. They seem very organized. Thanks for that information, Michael. I'm sure you'll be one of the first to sign. Oh, and there's Brian Stewart's email. Thank you, Chief Stewart. Anything else for the good of the order, I suppose?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A, but if anything comes up, you guys can send an email to memberservices@sdao.com and we'll get that forwarded over to Mark and Hasina.
Well, there is a question, any comments or guidance on Senate Bill 243? The only guidance I would suggest is that you talk with your elected officials as to whether or not they feel it necessary to restrict concealed weapon permit holders from entering buildings where the public body meets. Again, it is restricted. I want to be very clear. It's not a blanket prohibition. It only applies to where the public body actually meets. Okay, so you could have, of course, other buildings where the public body does not customarily meet. It would not apply there. So it applies to city council chambers, right? Or a county commission, or where your elected officials, as I said, meet regularly.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out and we'll get you over to Mark and Hasina.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. And if you have any questions in the meantime, or if there's anything we can do, there's my dog saying he wants me to do something. Take him outside. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.